Hi guys, Max here, and we are back with episode 2 of Odd and Unexplained. And on this one, we're going to be talking about a guy named Ronald Henry Tammen Jr. This was a 19-year-old that went missing in 1953 from his dorm. When I first found out about Ron Tammen, I really had to, more and more information just kept coming up. I went deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. The longer I searched, the more information I was finding. There's nothing stopping you guys about finding out as much as you can, because it really is interesting. And the bottom line is that he shouldn't have gone missing. There's so much about him that he had going for him. He was, like I said, he was 19 years old. He was an athlete. He was a musician. He was a good student. He wasn't doing bad financially. Everything was going well for him. So that really makes it baffling. Alright, so Ron's birthday was July 23rd, 1933, and when he went missing, he went to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. I had to be careful with that because I immediately saw Miami and thought Florida, but no, this was Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. He was the resident hall advisor in Old Fisher Hall, which was a former mental asylum. Or, so that's a little bit strange. And that's where he went missing from. So what I've kind of done a little bit of a timeline on a dry erase board over here, and I'll try and make it as clear as I can, and we're going to cut to that right now. Alright guys, so here's the dry erase board with some events on it and timeline. It gives you a chance to look at my creepy serial killer Batman villain handwriting. Ron went missing Sunday, April 19th, 1953. I'm going to go over the timeline here, and there's 4 main events that sort of stick out to me, and we'll go into depth for each one of these events in a minute. So first, 8 p.m., he went downstairs into the lobby and requested new sheets because there was a fish in his bed. Strange. At 8:30 p.m., he heard a noise and he left the room. Did he return? No, I guess he didn't. 10 p.m., roommate returns to the room. All of Ron's stuff is in the room except a missing pillowcase. 11 p.m., a little girl named Barbara Spivey and her mother report a strange man at their doorstep about 12 miles away. So let's talk about event number 1. Yeah, so nothing other than that. He went down and he requested new sheets because he found a fish in his bed. My guess is that fraternity hijinks were part of the reason for that. I am also going to note right now, so we have some layout of the dorm he was in. He was on the 2nd floor, and his door was at the end of a hallway, and his dorm was one of the only rooms that had access to outside via a fire escape. So his room, in other words, was one of the only ones in the building that could be accessed through a back way. I think that plays a big part in his disappearance. All right, on to 8:30. He heard a noise and left his room. Let's talk about that for a second. I had to cite several articles to try and get the best idea of what happened. A noise was heard and he left the room, I believe. Now, it's kind of hazy at this point. I got some articles that mentioned he went down to the lobby and told some guys that he had heard a noise and he was going to check it out, and then he went back to his dorm. My guess is that because he was hall advisor, he might have actually written it down in a log somewhere, or an activity log. I'm not sure. Not sure. All I know is that this was the last reported activity from him before he vanished. So, he's up in his room and he heard a noise. Now, an interesting note here is that several sources say that the noise disturbed him. I don't know what that means. That's kind of ominous to me. The noise disturbed him, that he heard a disturbing noise. It wasn't that he heard a strange noise or an odd noise or something outside that he was going to go look at. More than one article said that it was a disturbing noise. Don't know what that is, but it's interesting that that's the word that they use. There might be nothing to it. There might be everything to it. So that was at 8:30. All right, 10 p.m. The roommate returns and finds all of Ron's stuff still in his room, but a pillowcase was missing. So yeah, at this point, the roommate came home. He found, I got a list here, so I hope you'd excuse my reading it. He found all of his clothes, so he didn't pack and go anywhere. His keys, wallet, lights were left on in the room. The radio was playing. And he had a psychology book open on the desk because I guess he had been studying. This is very strange to me. This kind of, to me, says that he was planning on coming back to the room and he wasn't planning on leaving for the night. Now, the roommate didn't report anything because he thought, oh, Ron was just out. And then when Ron didn't return in several hours, oh, he's probably spending the night at the frat. So he really didn't think too much of it. Yeah, and also I will note that in Ron's car, it was a 1938 Chevy, and it was gold according to the Charlie organization website, whatever that site is. He left his bass viola in his car, which he cherished that thing. And I mentioned he was doing well financially earlier. Ron had $200 in his bank account, and he didn't take it. Now, if you're wondering, if you're thinking, oh, $200, that's not that much. This is 1953. So I cross-referenced several inflation sites, and in 1953, having $200 in your bank account would have been about equivalent to having $1,800 in your bank account in 2017. So he was doing all right for a college student, you know. I would have taken that money if I were going to go and disappear. So that's very strange. All right, 11 p.m., Barbara Spivey and her mother report a strange man at the door. So it was at this point that a man matching the description of Ron Tammen showed up at the door of a Barbara Spivey, who at the time was a little girl, and her and her mom answered the door. So the man, there's a few interesting things about the man that showed up matching Ron's description. He did not have the clothes for a cold night, and it was cold that night. He didn't know where he was, which is very, very odd. And he wanted to know the directions to the nearest bus stop. Now, the buses that night were not running the midnight route. So if he did indeed shuffle off into the darkness looking for that bus stop, there was no bus to catch. They didn't know that at the time, of course. Now, there are a few little things that are very interesting about him knocking on the door that night at 11 p.m. She said that he appeared dirty, a little bit disheveled, a little bit, disoriented, not really being all there. And she also said that there's something very vacant about his eyes. Some articles cited that anyway. So I find that very, very, very interesting. A lot of people that look into this case, this is me being personal now about it, not personal, but my own interjection about it. A lot of people that look into this case don't think too much of this incident of him going to the door of the Spiveys. I actually think it happened. I have nothing to base it on, but I actually do think he went to their door. And it all ties into what I think actually happened to him. So let's talk about that. I think he fell victim to a fraternity prank gone bad. Now, some people think it was paranormal. Some people think all sorts of theories. But one that I am really comfortable thinking happened was indeed a prank gone wrong. And let me present my case for why I think that's so. Okay, he had a fire escape outside of his room. He was indeed part of a frat. The noise in the dead fish tells me that there were hijinks in the happening. The noise that he heard, that's very strange and it's creepy, but I really think it was the frat trying to lure him out or creep him out. The missing pillowcase tells me that they might have thrown a blind over his head and taken him out in the middle of nowhere and done that old classic super asshole, drop a guy off in the middle of nowhere and have him wander his way back home. That's really, sucks, but that's hazing, man. That's what I think happened. I think during this series of events, there was an accident. So this got me to wondering what could actually have killed Ron Tammen that night during a hazing prank gone wrong. I started to think about the weather, and a few articles mentioned how it was rather cold that night, especially the Spiveys mentioned how, there was snow out and he had no clothes for snow weather. So how cold was it? So I tried to look up the weather for Oxford, Ohio that night, and I couldn't find Oxford, Ohio temperatures that night, but I did find Columbus, Ohio temperatures that night, which is about 80 miles away, and it was 19 degrees in Columbus. 19 degrees is pretty cold. I can only assume that very similar weather conditions were happening in Oxford where Ron was. Now, there's a lot of self-respecting Midwesterners that say, 19 degrees, that's nothing. We have some of the worst winters ever. That's true. But it's kind of deceptive, because if you're used to really cold and bitter and horrible winters, you think you're really super badass, and you go out in that 19 degrees thinking it's no big deal, and then you could fall victim to it very easily. And I think that might have happened to Ron and maybe his friends, you know, people, if indeed this did happen, these people that left him out there to walk back in the 19-degree weather weren't really thinking that it would be that big of a deal, when in fact I think the cold might have actually killed him. The woman, Spivey, whose door that I believe he went to that night, she said that his eyes seemed sort of glassy and vacant. I think maybe during the whole thing he could have sustained a head injury. Again, there's no basis for this other than this, and I'm just thinking about what's the most logical here in my mind. I really think that he could have sustained some sort of head injury, a prank gone wrong, they bashed his head by accident. It's sort of really bad to think about, but possibly. And they left him out there not knowing that they did the damage to him. And of course the buses weren't running, so maybe when he saw that the buses weren't running, if he made it that far, he started to wander around and he froze to death, which is a horrible death. So yeah, and I'm not even 19 degrees. I don't even know what the wind chill was like that night. Could have been much worse. So that's what I think happened to Ron Tammen that night. Now there are a few little weird things to mention. Okay, so 3 weeks after Ron went missing, residents of Fisher Hall were hearing singing in the garden, and they would go out and investigate this, and they would try and find the epicenter of where they were hearing this noise from. And every time they got to where they thought the source of the singing was, nothing would turn up. Until one night they were doing this and they were hearing the singing, and a large white figure stood up from behind some bushes and bolted away from them. Now, I've read some articles that say that this was somebody dressed in white, and I've read some things that say that this thing was white. Now, was it somebody in a white coat, or was it a big white albino Bigfoot? I don't know what it means. Now, when the guys gave chase to it, they said that it moved away from them in superhuman speed, and after that, it was gone. It pulled away from them. They also said it was very tall. I don't know what that means. I don't even know that this event happened. I kind of tend to think, no, it's just one of those fantastical tall tales that come from the sort of eeriness of somebody disappearing. You know how people are. They like to circulate creepy stuff once something like that happens. So yeah, that happened, or did it? I don't know. November 19th, 1952, 5 months prior to the day of Ron's disappearance, Ron went to a Dr. Garrett Boone to get his blood typed. It turned out Ron was an O positive. The doc asked, hey, Ron, why do you want to get your blood typed? Ron said, I might want to give blood someday, which he thought was very strange. And in the 70s, when Dr. Boone was asked about this, he said that at no point in his 30 plus years of doing medicine had anybody come up and asked for this. It was very strange. Why would Ron go and pay $20 to get his blood typed when he could have got it done at the campus for free? I don't know that it has anything to do with his disappearance, but it is a weird thing that happened. And finally, in 1978, when Fisher Hall was the dorm that Ron was living in when he disappeared, when Fisher Hall was torn down, they searched the grounds and the foundation extensively for any remains of Ron's body, and nothing was turned up. And to this day, no trace of Ron Tammen has been seen.